oral questions. Question orale. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has a pay-to-play problem. It's because the Prime Minister has expensive taste and powerful friends. First, it was vacation on Billionaire Island. Then it was the special legal deal for SNC-Lavalin. Then it was speaking fees and taxpayer dollars for we. Now it's Liberal donations for judicial appointments. Mr. Speaker, we now know that the Prime Minister's top Liberal Alberta advisor has more say on who becomes a judge than the Attorney General. Mr. Speaker, how many more well-connected Liberals is the Prime Minister going to make taxpayers pay for?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we reformed the judicial appointments process, making it merit-based, creating independent committees to make recommendations on judicial appointments. We will continue to look for the absolute best jurists across the country to step up, continue to appoint people that reflect the great diversity of this country, so we have a bench that looks much more like Canada. We will continue to appoint the highest qualified jurists on a merit-based approach that we reformed after the Conservatives made it political.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Monsieur le Président, notre
Mr. Speaker, our justice system must be impartial, yet this government is picking judges based on ideological requirements and partisan ones. They have one way of doing things for Liberal candidates, another way for other people. A political staffer of the Minister of Justice sounded the alarm, but he was silenced. How many other Liberal employees are afraid of saying the truth? The Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, after all the Conservative partisanship in 2016, we reformed our system of judicial appointments. It's now based on merit. We work with an independent committee. In order to make a selection and recommendations, we will always choose the best individuals to sit on the bench. And we will continue to have and work for a justice system that reflects our whole country. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Almost 20% of the judicial appointments in Newfoundland and Labrador are vacant. Now we know it's probably because the Liberals are having trouble finding donors in that province. The last appointment was made in March of 2019. Mr. Speaker, there's no shortage of great lawyers in Newfoundland and Labrador, and leaving this many seats open is creating real access to justice problems for Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. Mr. Speaker, is the Prime Minister holding up justice in Newfoundland and Labrador because he's still looking for his favourite Liberal donors?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, after years of neglecting Newfoundland and Labrador, after years of Conservative government that couldn't quite get it right on nominations to the Supreme Court, we are proud to nominate the very first Newfoundlander and Labradorian to the Supreme Court of Canada. Our appointments to the bench are made on a merit-based process, and we draw from a broad panel of experts in order to get the right people to the bench across the country. We will continue to do so, and we'll take no lessons from the Conservatives on the way they did partisan appointments, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Monsieur le Président.
Mr. Speaker, if the We Charity scandal has showed us anything, it's that there is one line for this government, a line for Liberal friends, and another one for other Canadians. The scandals of this government have broken the trust that Canadians have in it. When will the Prime Minister stop governing for his friends and start governing for all Canadians? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, since the beginning of the pandemic, we have focused on giving aid to Canadians. Yesterday, we had 2,400 more new COVID cases. We will continue to focus on assistance to families, businesses, workers, and grandparents. We will continue to focus on Canadians and delivering for Canadians. We will continue to make the Parliament work because it is time to deliver for Canadians and not a time to follow the Conservatives into an election. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Canadians have a trust problem with this Prime Minister. It's because he keeps looking after people who need his help the least. Now Canadians want to know What powerful friend is he protecting now? Whose name is beneath all the black ink on the WE documents? Who did he prorogue Parliament for? Who was promoting schemes that cost taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars? Who was he protecting when he instructed his Liberal MPs to filibuster for hours at committee? Who and what are the Prime Minister covering up with these latest threats of an election?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with what the Leader of the Opposition said this morning, with the motion he put forward in his own name, and even with the question he's asking, he is demonstrating clearly that he has lost confidence in the government's ability to manage this pandemic. The question he has put before the House, which will be voted on tomorrow, is whether or not Parliament has lost the confidence of, the government has lost the confidence of Parliament. We believe that we need to continue to work together in Parliament to deliver, which is why we're proposing a special committee to look into government spending, why we will continue to focus on Canadians while Conservatives focus on politics.
L'honorable député.
The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, stress and suspense is unbearable. Will we be going into an election? That's the big question. But the government itself says that it's a vote of confidence. So I would challenge you, either there's a problem or they think that it won't happen. But they don't want it to be its fault. But let's stop playing games. Do you or do you not want to go to an election? I ask the Prime Minister, the Right Honourable Prime Minister. In fact, Mr. Speaker, we have other things to do here in the House. So we have to work on a daily basis to deliver for Canadians, for small businesses that are suffering because of COVID-19, for seniors who are concerned and living in the long-term care homes, for Canadians across the country who are worried about the healthcare system and the health crisis, as well as the future of their children. That is why we on this side of the House, we are working hard to deliver for Canadians, and we will continue to do so in the hopes that the opposition parties will continue to work in order to make this parliament, this minority parliament, work. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. It's more beautiful than credible. So if you don't want a bicycle, don't buy a bicycle, especially if you don't want to pedal. The Prime Minister doesn't want to go into an election. Can he tell his neighbor on the left that it's not a confidence motion? We're going to have a committee and that we're going to look into the We Charity issue because proroguing the Parliament in order to try to avoid that has happened. And we're going to do our job instead. The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, for months, the Bloc has been talking about an election, not us. We are focusing on the work that we need to do for Canadians. We will continue to deliver on a daily basis through the subsidy for businesses, through assistance, through the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, which has been transformed into EI. We will focus on Canadians, and we hope that the opposition parties will continue to work with us to deliver for Canadians. But it's a choice. It's their choice to go into election or not. The Honourable Member for Rosemont Petite Patrie. The Liberals are trying to hide behind the opposition in justifying a call of an election in the midst of a health crisis. Instead of getting to the bottom of their WE scandal and their WE friends, they prefer instead to take people hostage and abusing democratic institutions. It's irresponsible. Let's be clear. If the Prime Minister wants to call an election, he can go and visit the Governor General. Otherwise, he can work with the opposition, put in place a committee in order to find answers for the people. People deserve the truth. What are the Liberals afraid of? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we proposed a special committee that will be able to look at the expenses, the expenditures by government. We're very happy to continue working in Parliament because during this crisis, we are working for Canadians. There were 2,400 new COVID cases announced yesterday, 22,000 active cases throughout the country. We will continue to focus on this health crisis and the economic crisis. We will be there to protect Canadians and deliver for them. We hope the opposition will do the same.
For Timmins, James Bay.
We are in the worst medical and economic catastrophe in a century, and yet this Prime Minister has stated his willingness to plunge the nation into a pandemic election all over the procedural wrangling of a committee. Seriously. Now, this is the same Prime Minister who prorogued Parliament and monkey-wrenched the work of our committees. So if he wants to take advantage of the pandemic, he can go to the Governor-General anytime. He doesn't need to hide behind the opposition. Or he can show some maturity and let Parliament do the work that we are here for. So what's it going to be? Is he going to be keep the cover-up, or is he going to let Parliament do the work, or is he just going to go to the Governor-General?
Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we want Parliament to work, which is why we've proposed a special committee to look into government spending in the exceptional circumstances of this pandemic. But the Conservative opposition put forward a motion that very clearly outlines the fact that the Leader of the Opposition himself admitted earlier today that he does not have confidence in this government to manage the pandemic. And now the opposition parties have a choice. Do they want to make Parliament work and work for Canadians, or do they want to vote non-confidence and trigger election? The choice, Mr. Speaker, is theirs. On this side of the House, we're going to keep working for Canadians.
Right Honourable Member, or the Honourable Member for Portage-Lisker.
Mr. Speaker, there's a troubling pattern with this Prime Minister when he's backed into a corner or doesn't get his way. He elbows, he bullies, he fires, and he threatens. And he's doing that again right now as his cozy relationship with we is being exposed. He's threatening to plunge Canadians into an election during a pandemic. Now, Mr. Speaker, it's been said that those with nothing to hide, hide nothing. So when will the Prime Minister stop the threats, stop hiding, and come clean with Canadians?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, we propose the creation of this committee where all members can ask questions, an important committee for important work. What the Conservatives are doing is to try to jam the government, right? Is to try to focus on the other parties. This is an ultra-partisan, it's an ultra-partisan move, Mr. Speaker, that serves nothing for Canadians. It just serves their own interest. It's irresponsible, and they should be ashamed of that.
The Honourable Member for Portage-Lisker.
Well, these Liberals should be ashamed of themselves. We are in the middle of a pandemic. Kids can't go out for Halloween. People can't visit their dying loved ones. Restaurants and small businesses are being shut down. But the Prime Minister must have his way, and if he doesn't, he's going to force everyone into an election. These are not the actions of an honourable leader, Mr. Speaker. These are the actions of a self-serving emperor with no clothes. So, Mr. Speaker, will the Prime Minister stop the cover-up, stop holding Parliament hostage, back off from his threats of an election if this motion passes? Show some leadership.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, we're in the middle of a pandemic. We're working hard for Canadians on health issues, on economic issues. We're asking a collaboration for all members of the House. And the best thing they find to do is to come up with this ultra-irresponsible motion, Mr. Speaker. They got together, they thought they put their best brains together, and they say, hey, this is the best way we're going to help Canadians. Let's jam the government, Mr. Speaker, and that's unacceptable.
I just want to remind the honourable members that there are folks who are participating hybrid, and we want to make sure that they hear everything. So we want to keep the sounds down. I know there's a little bit of chatter, and that's part of it, but some of you have wonderful voices, and they're very strong, and they do carry quite well, and we don't want them drowning out the person who's speaking. The honourable member for Carleton.
So they've got absolutely nothing to hide, and they're willing to bring themselves down to hide it. That is effectively the position of this government. They are prepared to defeat themselves in order to stop anyone from asking them questions about the Prime Minister's gift of $500 million to a group that had given his family $500,000. We want to put all of this in one committee so the rest of Parliament can work for Canadians' lives and livelihoods across the House of Commons. What have they got to hide?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, we're proposing the creation of this committee with members from all parties that can ask all the important questions, do the important work. You put that in contrast with what the Conservatives are doing at this moment, when people are suffering, people are looking for their jobs, people are worried for their loved one. The best idea, with all their brains around the table that they come up to, is that motion that wants to paralyze the government, Mr. Speaker, and that is totally unacceptable.
The honourable member for Carleton.
Well, let's talk about all of the brains around that table over there. They said, we tried to cover it up by shutting down Parliament. Yep. But then Parliament came back. And so we tried to cover it up by giving 20 hours of speeches. But then we ran out of things to say. So, can any of the smart brains around the table come up with a better idea to cover it up? I know, let's call an election. That's the best that they can come up with. We've got millions unemployed. We have lives at risk. We should be working for Canadians. Why are they trying to upturn all of that important work to cover up their scandal?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, my colleague across the aisle wants to give the impression he's an expert on everything. Let me quote him something here. The decision on what to reveal is made by non-partisan public servants from whom it has long been a tradition not to reveal cabinet confidences. That has been the case going back to all previous governments of all party stripes, Mr. Speaker. And who said that? The member of Carleton.
L'honorable député.
The honourable member for Chicoutimi-Le Fjord. Mr. Speaker, the federal Liberal carnival will never change. Mandate after mandate, it's always the same song. No respect for public funds, for Canadian taxpayers' money. During the middle of a pandemic, they took advantage to line their pockets of the We charity. It failed ethically, but also in terms of official languages by offering the management of the program to a unilingual Anglophone company. Why did the Prime Minister use We charity at the expense of French? The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons. Why is the opposition giving priority to a partisan, irresponsible motion instead of working with the government on the health of Canadians, on the health of our seniors, on the health of our businesses, Mr. Speaker? Why did the opposition to play partisan politics in an unacceptable way instead of working with us? It's holding its hand out. It's still holding its hand. Our hand is still held out. Let's work together instead of partisan politics. The honourable member for Chicoutimi-Le Fjord. Mr. Speaker, what I understand is that the Prime Minister was going to give money quickly, but not so quick when it came time to helping the aeronautics industry in Quebec, the green aluminum plants, shipping strategy. The Liberals were quick to help their friends and no one else. How can the Prime Minister, who's from Quebec, deliberately ignore the Francophones in Quebec and across the country? The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House of Commons. Mr. Speaker, our government stands up on a daily basis for Francophones. We stand up every day for Quebec and Quebec industries, for our seniors, for the healthcare system. Mr. Speaker, on a daily basis, we defend Quebecers and Quebec. We will be there for them, be it in a pandemic or any other time. When the Conservatives have to make the good choice for Quebec, all they do is come up with a partisan committee. The Honourable Member for Beloeil-Chambly. If the Liberals stand up for Quebec as they stand up for Davy, we're in trouble. The Bloc Québécois voted against the throne speech because the Bloc Québécois did not accept that we would attack Quebec healthcare system. We were prepared to go to an election for that reason. The reason that the Liberals want to go to an election is to hide their scandal. The Prime Minister will be the proverbial needle in a haystack. I believe I understand that the NDP is hearing reason, and I presume that the Conservatives will vote for their own motion. Is the Prime Minister losing his bluff because he wants to hide behind this serious ethics violation? The Honourable Leader of the Government in the House. Mr. Speaker, with regard to the confidence vote, the Bloc lacks credibility here. For a month, they've said that they would vote against the government. the leader of the bloc said, we'll go to an election, we'll go to an election. And now they say that we're not responsible because we're talking about confidence in the House. The system is working here, Mr. Speaker. If they have confidence, they should say it, and if they don't, they should say that. The honourable member for Beloeil-Chambly. I don't have confidence in this government, Mr. Speaker. And I don't imagine that they can say that. No one buys that argument. The government is trying to either force an election or to hide its ethics issues. But the same leader is going to stand up and say, you're right, life goes on, and let's go back to work. The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, there is not anybody who is unemployed who wants to go and vote in an election. The Bloc is being irresponsible. It's joining the Conservatives in order to try to force the fall of the government. They should take responsibility for their choices and the consequences of those choices. They should have the courage to do that.
Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Mr. Speaker, for over 15 hours, Liberals at the Ethics Committee have filibustered and blocked the production of WE documents. They've read the newspaper, they've given us a philosophy lesson, they've read letters. It's all been a little much. All of this is a desperate attempt to cover up corruption and hide these documents from Canadians. Whatever happened to sunlight and being open by default? When will the filibuster and the Liberal cover-up end?
The Honourable House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, in case I read too fast earlier, I'm going to read again what I read before to my colleague. The decision on what to reveal is made by non-partisan public servants for whom it has long been a tradition not to reveal cabinet confidences. That has been the case going back to all previous governments of all party stripes. Now, do my colleague there agree with his colleague over there?
Yeah. The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
So, Mr. Speaker, well, there we have it. There's going to be no end to the filibuster. They're not going to end their cover-up. They'll stop at nothing to prevent these documents from coming to light. Even in the middle of a pandemic, they want to plunge Canadians into an election. So the question is very simple. What are you so desperate to hide?
Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, I guess they'll stop at nothing to provoke an election, Mr. Speaker. Right. On this side of the House, we suggested the creation of a special committee, a very important committee to do an important job that would allow all parties to ask important questions, call witnesses, do everything that is required from the opposition, Mr. Speaker. That is our proposal. Why are they saying no? Why do they have to have this ultra-partisan responsible committee to jam the government? Why is it so important for them, Mr. Speaker?
I just want to remind the honourable members, it's one question at a time. I know there's a lot of questions that you want to ask, but we can only ask one question at a time, not while somebody's answering, or while somebody's asking a question, it makes it that much more difficult.
The honourable member for Louis-Saint-Laurent. Mr. Speaker, why we want this committee is because Canadians are entitled to the truth. That's why we want to create the committee. When the Liberals are in trouble, what do? They prorogued Parliament. And now they're in trouble. What are they doing? They are threatening to call an election if we don't agree. We're always on the side of truth. Why is the government refusing to table all the relevant documents related to the We Charity issue? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, they always vote on the side of the truth when the truth suits them, and they will decide what the truth is, and if they like it, if so, good, if not, great. But we propose the creation of a committee that will do very important work. It will allow us to ask questions, allow the government to improve the programs, Mr. Speaker. It's very responsible, and I invite all members to support this so that we can do the work necessary, because we want to work for Canadians, for children, families, seniors, students, businesses, and we will continue to do that job, Mr. Speaker. The honourable member for Louis-Saint-Laurent. Mr. Speaker, in listening to CBC this morning, I remembered my years in the National Assembly in the Bastarache Commission when we learned, back at the time of the Bastarache days, that the provincial Liberal government had a system of post-its where they identified which Liberal friends could become judges. Liberals are always going to be Liberals, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Justice Can the Minister of Justice give us the assurance here in the House that any Liberal friends consulted about the appointment of judges, the Honourable Minister of Justice? Mr. Speaker, our government has put in place a very important measure to ensure that the appointment process reflects the quality and diversity of Canada. I want to be clear. I have never been subject to any pressure to appoint any judge The decision to make the recommendation to Cabinet is mine alone.
Yesterday, we put forward a simple motion. We asked the House to affirm the treaty and inherent rights of the Mi'kmaq and Maliseet people that were affirmed treaties, confirmed in the Canadian Constitution and upheld in the Supreme Court. But the Liberals voted no. They also refused to acknowledge the Mi'kmaq deserve full and equal protection by the law from violence and intimidation. They voted no to recognizing their failure to respect nation-to-nation relationships, to accommodate the moderate livelihood fishery that has led to the crisis that we're facing today. My question is simple. Why?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite what the NDP say, our government is having nation-to-nation conversations with First Nations. That's imperative because we have always said the Mi'kmaq have an affirmed treaty right to fish in pursuit of a moderate livelihood under the Marshall Decision. And when it comes to safety, everyone in Canada deserves to be protected, Mr. Speaker, and that's why we're standing up, making sure that the resources are there that the province of Nova Scotia needs for the RCMP. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Cowichan-Malahat-Langford.
Mr. Speaker, today's serious alarm bells are being raised about Liberal partisanship in the Prime Minister's office. The Liberals are treating judicial appointments like a basket of party favors for well-connected partisan friends. This smacks of the SNC-Lavalin scandal, where the PMO pressured the former Attorney General, interfering with her office's criminal prosecution of that Liberal-friendly corporation. Partisan appointments can open the door for Liberals to lean on judges in inappropriate ways we can only imagine. Have they learned nothing from the SNC, Aga Khan, and WE scandal? When will the Prime Minister learn that partisan appointments have no place in our judicial system?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to remind the honourable member that we put in a process for appointing judges which removes the partisanship that we saw with the previous government. Mr. Speaker, we have a judicial appointment committee. We have judicial appointment committees in place across Canada. Those committees work hard to vet the candidacies without any recourse to partisan political matters. Mr. Speaker, I take those recommendations, highly recommended or recommended. We do further consultations, and Mr. Speaker, there is no partisanship in the names that I recommend to Cabinet.
The Honourable Member for Cape Breton-Canso.
Mr. Speaker, I'm proud to stand today in recognition and support for our doctors. They guide us in preventing future illnesses and injuries and heal us when we're sick or injured. And as medical professionals, they warn us about the dangers to our lives. One issue they continue to warn about is gun violence across Canada, but not everyone is listening. Conservatives have aligned themselves with a gun lobby who has plagiarized the Americans' NRA motto of stay in your lane and bully doctors who speak about the victims they have to treat and the family members they have had to inform who have lost a loved one. Can the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness please inform this House what steps our government is taking to address gun violence? Thank you.
Mr. Public Safety.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to begin by thanking the member from Cape Breton-Canso for his very important question. And today I want to join him in remembering the lives of those who have been impacted by gun violence. Mr. Speaker, since forming government, we've taken action by passing legislation that enhances background checks and helps law enforcement through better data collection. We've also delivered on our promise to prohibit tactical assault weapons that, Mr. Speaker, have no place in our society. And Mr. Speaker, we will continue to strengthen gun control by stopping guns at our border, by preventing theft and criminal diversion, and through the introduction of red flag laws. Mr. Speaker, we don't work for the gun lobby, we work for Canadians, and we'll work relentlessly to keep them safe.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
COVID bureaucracy kept dying Winnipeg man and his brother apart. I'm tired of these headlines. It's been 9 months into the COVID scandal and crisis, and the Liberals only use shutdown and a 14-day quarantine that nobody can afford as ways to address the pandemic. But countries around the world have started to use rapid testing for pre- and post-arrival testing as well as a way to reunite families, but not Canada. I want to review this failure and come up with a better path forward. We need to do that. That should be a nonpartisan issue, but the Liberals are blocking the Health Committee. They're blocking everybody from being able to do this. Why?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, on this side of the House, we believe in science and evidence as a way to manage our way through COVID-19 and the astronomical challenges it presents to Canadians from coast to coast. Mr. Speaker, we'll always put the health and safety of Canadians first and foremost in everything that we do. That's why we take so seriously our responsibility to control the importation of COVID-19 at the borders. Mr. Speaker, we're working with partners, provinces, territories, researchers to understand ways that we can manage the border effectively with the primary goal, Mr. Speaker, of protecting the health and safety of Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
You know what would be a great way to review science and evidence? The Health Committee. Yet the Liberals are blocking the review of this issue at every turn. It's been 10 days since we introduced a motion on this, and they keep filibustering it. Right now, there are thousands of airline workers who know that a bailout isn't going to save their jobs. They're seeing countries around the world implement pre- and post-arrival rapid testing as a way to keep these jobs sustained and keep people safe. But yet we can't review it at Health Committee because they're blocking this. It's like this government just doesn't want Parliament to be able to do its job. It's so arrogant. It's so frustrating. Why?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I will remind the member opposite that health committees are free to study issues that they choose. But on this side of the House, I'll tell you, as the government, we have an important role to make sure that we use science and evidence in our decision-making on how we manage COVID-19, including at the borders. And I want to thank my colleagues, particularly the provincial and territorial colleagues, who have worked so diligently with us to understand the important role that quarantine plays in our current response to reducing importations of COVID-19. Mr. Speaker, we'll always rely on science and evidence to keep Canadians safe.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the CRA sent a letter to hundreds of Canadians to warn them that there may be an issue with their bank account number and there is a risk of fraud. Many people said that they called the number and they received no answer. We have a direct number to call as members, but even we don't get an answer. Can the government tell us what's going on? The Honourable Minister. Hello, thank you very much. The interpreter would like to note that there's a sound issue. The Honourable Minister, there is an issue with your sound. Please ensure that you're not on mute. We cannot hear you.
OK, allez-y, on vous entend.
Can you hear me? Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. For the CRA, it is important for taxpayers to be able to receive all the tax credits and benefits that they're entitled to. We're continuing to work hard to make sure things are going smoothly. There are audits that are being done, and our system are in high demand right now. But we're going to continue to work on this. Thank you. The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, I'm sorry, but for 5 years now, the Minister has been saying the same banal answer. But this connection issue is 5 years old. The CRA, when someone receives a letter from the CRA, they feel stressed out. And if they tell you if you have an issue, call the number, and then no one answers. Imagine how tense you would feel. And it puts even more stress and pressure on you. Even before the pandemic, we had such issues. But people on the CRA line would never answer. But can the Minister tell us why we haven't been able to clarify this situation in 5 years? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that I don't agree with what my colleague has just said at all. Throughout the entire pandemic, the CRA has served more than 8 million Canadians, Mr. Speaker. They've ensured that people can receive the CERB, and they're making sure right now that people are receiving new benefits that were created, both in terms of the recovery benefit, but also the caregiver benefit and the sickness benefit. Inaudible for the interpreter. There's a sound issue.
L'honorable député de Rivière.
The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Mr. Speaker, it pays to be a friend of the Liberals. We saw this with We Charity, but we've also seen it with judicial appointments. The PMO has both hands in the appointment process. It checks whether future judges are Liberal donors or not, thanks to the Liberalist partisan tool. It vets the reputation of future judges with Liberal MPs and riding presidents. It checks whether future judges have Liberal Party signs on their lawns. What is the criteria for becoming a judge in Canada, Mr. Speaker? Being a good Liberal? The Honourable Minister for Justice. Mr. Speaker, as I've just said, we have established a judicial appointment process that is transparent, that reflects both the quality and the diversity of judges. I have never felt any pressure to appoint a particular judge, and it is only my opinion in terms of recommending a judge. And it's based on the needs of the court and also the needs of, there's no partisan approach at all to my process. The Honourable Member for Rivière-du-Nord. Last year, the Bloc denounced the Prime Minister when he was caught checking whether future judges were good Liberal Party donors or not. We noted that 90% of total party donations of new judges over the years went to the Liberal Party. And today we've learned that while the Bloc was shocked, there were already people in the Justice Minister's cabinet who were also scandalized. Mr. Speaker, the judges' scandal is just like the We Charity scandal. How come everywhere we look, the only thing we see are Liberal cronies obtaining favors? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, what my colleague has just said is absolutely false. We appoint judges from all different backgrounds and political stripes. We were very clear about the transparency of the process we established. I have appointed roughly 160 people since I've been Minister of Justice, and I'm very proud of the results. We appointed quality individuals across Canada, and I'm very proud of these results.
The Honourable Member for Langley-Aldergrove.
Mr. Speaker, when COVID hit in March, Transport Canada made the, in my opinion, correct decision to allow BC Ferries passengers to remain in their cars rather than mingle on the upper decks as another way to fight the spread of the coronavirus. But late last month, right when the second wave was threatening to come upon us, they reversed that decision. Will the Minister commit to reviewing that flip-flop decision, do the right thing for British Columbians?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to be clear on this. It's not a question of either or, either deciding in favor of letting people sit in their cars because of COVID or forcing people to get out of their cars because of the concern for marine safety. It is both. We both have a responsibility as Minister of Transport and the Minister of Health to make sure that passengers on board our ferries are safe, both from COVID and also from the possibility of a marine accident.
The Honourable Member for Foothills.
COVID has grounded our airline industry, and inaction by this Prime Minister ensures that it may never fully recover. But Germany, Japan, Iceland have all implemented rapid testing and shows that it is a safe, science-based alternative to quarantine. We are not saying throw open the borders, but we are saying is rapid testing gives us on the pathway to economic recovery. Yeah. Rapid testing reconnects communities, reunites families, gets Canadians back to work. Other jurisdictions around the world are safely implementing rapid testing. With the airline industry teetering, what is this Prime Minister waiting for?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Of maintaining appropriate health measures at the border is one that this government is seized with. As the member opposite knows, this is an issue that all countries are struggling to find a path forward on. In fact, the blend of a science around when quarantine can be released in partnership with testing is one that is under research here in Canada. In fact, we have a number of research projects underway and a number almost ready to be launched. And Mr. Speaker, we'll come back to the House with details when they're available.
The honourable member for Prince Albert.
Mr. Speaker, farmers in my riding have been calling me because they haven't received their CEBA benefit loans yet. Their banks are still waiting to be told whether this money can be deposited into their personal bank accounts, even though the government promised to act on this back in May. Many of these farmers have bills that come due at the end of this month, and they are unable to pay them. Will the minister instruct the department to correct this technicality immediately?
The honourable minister for small businesses.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for that really important question. And to all small businesses, in particular farming businesses, we want to assure them that absolutely we want them to get this important support in this loan. And we will announce very shortly the process for them to get access to that loan. The banking system in Canada doesn't have the same kind of due diligence for personal accounts as they do for banking accounts. Business accounts. So we're working very hard with the over 200 financial institutions to make sure that we get this to these businesses right away.
The honourable member for Châteauguay-Lacolle. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to underscore Small Business Week and most importantly to point out the creativity and cooperation small businesses have shown across the country since the beginning of the pandemic. In my riding of Châteauguay-Lacolle, management of companies such as Naperville, Uniprog and Naperville, Ogilvy Equestrian, Pro Air and Châteauguay and T Clean and Remy have put their shoulder to the wheel and changed their way of doing things, not only to preserve many jobs, but also by changing their production chains and to make masks, ventilators, and other PPE to help us fight COVID-19. The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, for Small Business Week, I would like to highlight the resiliency and innovation of companies in Châteauguay-Lacolle. Launching and running a small business takes a lot of work, and during a pandemic, it's a particular challenge. The second wave requires small businesses to roll up their sleeves once again. But I'd like to reassure companies in Naperville, in Leary, in Châteauguay, and in St. Remy, we'll be there for them.
Member for South Surrey, White Rock.
Mr. Speaker, it's no secret the Liberals are hoping Canadians will grow tired of the WE scandal. Frankly, we are sick of hearing about it too. I'd much rather stand here today and ask about the small businesses in my riding that are fighting for their lives. But as an official opposition member, it's my duty to hold the government accountable. So I rise before you today to ask, will the Prime Minister pledge to put an end to the barrage of roadblocks, redactions, and delays and let us do our jobs?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, if they want to talk about other stuff, they should ask questions about other stuff. It's that simple, Mr. Speaker. Instead of today being here debating a motion, an ultra-partisan, irresponsible motion, we can be debating how we can help our seniors, how we can help provinces, how can we help our businesses. But instead of doing that, no, Mr. Speaker. They had this great idea of putting a responsible motion on the table.
The honourable member for Bellechasse, Les Échemins-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, the pandemic is being used for many things. The Liberals want to use it to hide their scandals and corruption, but they've been uncovered. They want to trigger an election. A big scandal with hundreds of millions for their friends who close up shop when they get caught. The Liberals are tossing taxpayer dollars out the window. We want to know, where is this money going? Is it being properly managed? Mr. Speaker, we can walk and chew gum at the same time. And if the Liberals don't know this, we'll tell them. What are they hiding? Why not shed light on this truth? The Honourable Government House Leader. Once again, Mr. Speaker, they're talking about many things, but they're always focused on one thing. They're forcing the Parliament to debate this issue rather than discussing what we can do to help Canadians. Our seniors have suffered more than anyone else during this pandemic. There are thousands of people who are looking for jobs right now. There are parents who are concerned because schools are closed. That's what we should be debating today, not irresponsible motions like this one.
Member for Kenora.
The member for Sault Ste. Marie announced $800,000 of FedNor funding to the company SquidSwap last year. Mr. Speaker, we know that this company forwards their mail from Sault Ste. Marie, but that they're actually located in southern Ontario. They also have job opportunities and employees in BC and California, of all places. So what's missing here is anything to justify them receiving funding which is designated for Northern Ontario. Can the minister please tell us how many jobs were created in Sault Ste. Marie as a result of this funding?
Great question. The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we've been there since the beginning of the pandemic and even before by making sure that we invest in people in Northern Ontario. Maybe through the RRF program to protect jobs, and we've protected thousands of them across Ontario, in particular in Northern Ontario, but also to invest in economic development to make sure that we're creating new jobs. We know that Northerners actually need these investments, and we will be there to make sure that we are there for them. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Newmarket, Aurora.
Mr. Speaker, we know that COVID-19 has completely changed our daily lives, and the many necessary measures to keep us safe are taking a toll on the mental. The mental health crisis in our country is a silent pandemic for which there is no vaccine, and we are constantly hearing warnings and concerns from the medical professionals, and I hear concerns from my constituents as well. I'm seriously concerned about this, and I introduced a motion to study the impact of COVID-19 on the mental health and the well-being of Canadians at the Standing Committee for Health. Could the minister highlight our government's investments to support Canadians during these difficult times?
Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for Newmarket Aurora for his hard work on the Health Committee, in particular his leadership on this important issue. He's absolutely right. We have known that mental health and substance use issues are on the rise as a result of Canadians' distress around dealing with COVID-19. We very early on worked to establish supports for Canadians through the wellnesstogether.ca portal, but on October 9th, I was pleased to announce that we are investing an additional $10 million in COVID-19 mental health and substance use service needs and delivery research. Mr. Speaker, this will support 55 teams across the country to address specific mental health and substance use crisis needs resulting from COVID-19.
Member for Vancouver East.
We're in the middle of a pandemic. The cold, wet weather's upon us, and the Liberals are profit housing groups are still waiting to see how they can apply for the measly 3,000 units under the Rapid Housing Initiative announced prior to the throne speech. The government's own website says information would be forthcoming, and 1 month later, they are still waiting. Community groups want to quickly secure the distressed housing before large capital funds can swoop in and take them to turn a profit. Now the Liberals are threatening an election because they want to hide from the WE scandal. Enough is enough. Will the Prime Minister put the needs of the people first and get the housing built?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, only the New Democratic Party will consider a $1 billion investment in rapid housing to be quote-unquote insignificant. We're proud of our response to the most vulnerable in this country. $1 billion in rapid housing initiative to build new housing and convert existing buildings to house the most vulnerable in our communities, $237 million for reaching home directly to communities as they respond to the needs of the most vulnerable during the COVID-19 pandemic.
Honourable Member for Vancouver Granville.
Mr. Speaker, the consequences of not recognizing Mi'kmaq jurisdiction and implementing their treaty rights is another high-profile example of why we need an Indigenous rights recognition framework. Across Canada, there are literally hundreds of issues, most with limited or no profile, that require a coordinated and comprehensive federal approach. Like the DFO in relation to fish, the Department of Finance continues to set policy that impedes rights implementation. As a specific example and question, why doesn't the government support self-governing First Nations raising property taxes under the First Nations Fiscal Management Act?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the honourable member for her question as well as the work she's done on the recognition of rights.
Mr. Speaker, we are moving forward as a government on a number of different fronts. In my particular case, Mr. Speaker, it is in my mandate letter to advance the passage of UNDRIP, which is the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. That will present a first significant step, Mr. Speaker, in the recognition of rights. And from there, Mr. Speaker, we can move across the country and really advance the quest and the path of reconciliation, which we, Mr. Speaker, quite frankly, are morally obligated to do in this country. Thank you.